Welcome back for part 2. In this video, we're going to cover how we make dynamic materials inside of our blueprints so that we can control the materials. Now, why this is helpful is you may find yourself wanting, hey, I want variations of this car in different colors. Well, normally you'd have to duplicate your blueprint and then duplicate your material instance. And you're going to have a lot of different duplicates, a lot of work, and then if you need to revise stuff, it's all scattered. This is going to keep it all under one blueprint, so that it's easier to control and a lot cleaner to work with. We are back. Let's show you this DeLorean because it's sweet. What we've done so far is we have set up a bunch of variables with controls that we're going to use to control this DeLorean when we drive it. And all this is happening and animating inside of the sequencer. But you can see here, we have this branch. And these are all of the controls that follow that we're using in the construction script. And we're also duplicating all of this behavior in the event tick, so it's there for runtime. Now, what we're going to focus on this video is, you guessed it, material controls. 5 points if you actually did guess that. And inside of here, we're going to dig into how we're going to use these blueprints to control the vehicle. Now, I'm going to demonstrate what this is before we get too deep into it. Why do we want to do this? Okay. Let's say you want to have 4 DeLoreans, or any vehicle. You want to duplicate this rig and use it a number of times, and you want them each to be a different color. Well, without these controls, you'd have to duplicate this blueprint 4 different times, and then you'd also have to go through and duplicate this material instance 4 different times. So you'd have a unique blueprint and a unique material instance, and you can control the color and stuff like that individually. But say you want to control other things like texture brightness, emissive values, all these other controls that we have, you just have endless iterations on this blueprint, which is just an awful way to work, especially if you want to make changes globally. So here, I have a bunch of controls set up on here, and now you can start to see like car paint and stuff like this that I've got applied. It all just controls all the meshes exactly how you would want it, which is wonderful. We also have texture brightness that I'm using in different aspects. So let's see, that's the lights. We can control if we want to have certain things like this emit, tail lights. Watch what I'm doing. Emission on the backs of some of these, crank up some of these values, and say we also just want to change the color of these, because who wouldn't want to? I'm going to show you how to set up these controls right now. We're going to start off in the construction script. I have packaged all these inside of a function called material controls. And this is just to kind of keep things clean. So as I'm working between the event tick and the construction script, everything is streamlined. So when I make changes, we're good to go. Material controls here. I've got the sequence. Instead of daisy chaining all these together, we're just kind of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, however many of these we're going to do. And we're going to start and focus on car paint material. Now this looks like a lot, but it's really not that much. And we're going to use this over and over and over throughout this entire video. So let's show you what this is. I've got this luggage cover here, and well, let's just look at the luggage cover. So on this vehicle, if you want to know how to get to this, I've selected the hood, which in this model that we have gotten off the internets is called luggage cover. So to access this inside of here, what I would do is grab this luggage cover, drag it in, and there's my reference to it. We're going to delete this because I've already gotten it. And I'll explain to you what's happening, why we're doing it, and a few tips of why to do this. So the first thing is get material. This is going to say, okay, we have this object here. This is our target. We want to get the material of this piece. And to visualize this, if I select this hood or luggage cover, under materials, we have only one. You could have as many as you want, which makes a difference, but element 0, and that's what we're referencing. So if you come back to this, it says element 0. Say you have like 7 materials on here and you're using number 5. You need to make sure this element index is set to the correct material that you have on the side. Otherwise, it'll either break or you're pulling values from something different. After that, we're at create dynamic material instance. This is telling, hey, we have this material instance that Unreal is seeing throughout the entire engine. We want to make a dynamic version of this, which is almost like an instance on the instance. And we're going to be able to control these parameters and values on this blueprint without actually having to go in and change these materials. It makes a big difference. So this luggage cover is plugged into the target on both of these, and then your return value here goes to your source material. Now, one thing that I'm going to cover real quick that is going to carry throughout these, you could right click at any given point and say create material instance or dynamic, and you see all these options in here. Without selecting a specific piece, it's going to try to look at every single thing you could possibly have, which is pretty much overwhelming. What I prefer to do is to drag off of this node, and you'll see that up here this check mark says context sensitive. This is going to filter out everything that's applicable to this node specifically. So now, say you do, gotta remember what I'm doing, create dynamic material instance. There's only one option, and this is going to create that exact same piece. So a little nugget of wisdom: if you're trying to build off of something, it's best to drag from nodes. The exact same thing goes from these values going backwards. If you don't know what kind of data you're using, say you don't know this is a scalar or a float value, you drag off of here and promote to variable, it's going to do it for you. Let's undo that so I don't break everything. So we've established this first part of the chain. The next part of this is you could pull from this value and say, all right, we're going to set scalar parameter value. And this is the better way to do it, because if you right click and try to do this, it may not always work. It may give you an error. So pull from the pin and do it that way. So set scalar parameter value. What this means is we're using a single point of data, which is a float. It's just 0 to 1, as opposed to this linear color value or a vector 3, which we'll talk about in a second. So we've got our variable here, paint roughness. Let's go down here and find it, and I will show you what we're looking at here. So let's see, materials, paint roughness. I've created all these variables in advance. This eye socket means it's public. All of these are public, minus this wheel emission hue because I didn't want to use it. But any of these that have this visibility here is also going to show up out here, and I've got it referenced over here, just so you're not confused. But under my material controls, paint roughness. So now this is a 0 to 1 value. So all these exposed public variables are going to show up out here. The other thing to make sure we've got, if you want to animate this in sequencer, exposed to cinematics, that's good to do. But since I don't plan on animating the roughness at all, I just left this unchecked. I didn't need one more thing to dig through in sequencer. So this float goes to this, and the last thing we want to make sure that we've got, let's go to the viewport, let's open this material up. Let's come right back here. So parameter name. This needs to be spelled exactly right. It needs to be perfect. If you misspell this, it will break. And the material that we're referencing is this car paint. So it's attached to our luggage cover. This is the only material, but if you had more, it's element 0. And in here, we've got min roughness. So I took this parameter name that I've got this material here that we want to pull into this blueprint. So min roughness, make sure you type that into parameter name exactly. And after this, it's pretty much the same thing over and over. So I've got paint roughness. The last thing I wanted to do for this piece is to change the color of it. So checking again, I've got base color. It's all one word, camel casing, and it's a it's a vector 3. It's 3 parameters. I'm not using alpha, so you don't need a vector 4, but just the 3. So I did set vector parameter value. That's the next one that comes off this. You got to make sure you target set up to the return value of this dynamic material instance. You can't chain it off of here, and make sure it's named the same. I initially did not know what this needed. It said linear color structure. I didn't really know what that was, so I drug off here and just promote to variable, and it does the work for you. I didn't have to go dig through here and figure it all out. And that is the base structure of what I'm using for this whole thing. I pretty much at this point duplicated that whole set. The variables are the same, the structure is the same. We just pulled off of each pin. The only thing that's different is the different meshes that I needed to use. So I had the hood, the body, and 2 doors, which as you can see afterwards, there's only 4 of these in here. That's really all I needed to get this set up to color control. So that's the first part of this. I'll show you where else I use this, and then I'll walk into the second section of this that gets a little bit more complicated. So material controls, we've got the car paint. The lights, I just did the same setup. I just pulled from the emissive texture from a different material and plugged this in. So you can see emissive multiplier, that's what I called this. The emissive lights, I'll break this one down in a minute, but it's the exact same setup. I'm just breaking this into pieces, and I'll show you how I divided this up. Last one here, wheel emission, exact same thing. I'm just not controlling the color. It's just the brightness. So to demonstrate this, let's see wheel emission. I can turn this on, and now these are glowing. That came as part of the model. The tubes, everything else, this is all here. So that's the rough overview of this entire thing. All right, part 2. So this model was from TurboSquid. It came with texture sets already made, nice and efficiently packed in. It's great. I've absolutely loved this model. But the only thing I didn't like about this was the emissive value on these tubes is tied to the exact same texture that controls the emissive value of this exhaust. And I'm going to show you how I got around this. The blueprint setup is pretty much the same, but the materials I had to get a little creative with. So as you can see here, I'm using substrate. This probably needs to evolve a bit from the time this tutorial is made, but that's what we've got. The emissive value is the important one, but you can see base color, normal, roughness, metallic, all that fun stuff. But let's follow emissive out. Pretty straightforward. I'll explain to this what this is. I've got my base color, which is black. I'm using a lerp, so value 1, value 2, which is this emissive texture. But the problem I had to work around with this is I wanted some controls, and I wanted to control these independently. If I open this up, you'll see anything that's in blue relates to the tubes that you saw in the car, and anything that's in yellow relates to the exhaust on the car. Now, if I try to do a hue shift on this to change the color, it's going to do all of it at once. So say I want this yellow to be blue, this is probably going to be something like green or magenta or whatever. So I divided this up, and I didn't want to deal with that. Brightness was another one as well. So that's the texture that I've got. That's the problem that I'm looking at. The solution was pretty simple. I went into Photoshop, and I made this artfully crafted mask. Everything that's in white relates to the tubes, and everything that's in black, which is the negative, relates to the exhaust. And I'll start with the tubes and then show you how I changed it for the exhaust. So let's see, black as the base, emissive texture as the top, and I'm using this inside of a lerp as the alphas. So this black and white mask, the white is what's going to stay. That is my mask. And in here, I started with this emissive tubes multiplier, and you're going to see the rear multiplier and all this stuff. Your variables need to be named different. If you name them the same, whatever you change one, it's going to change every other one that's named the same throughout here. So keep that in mind. That can drive you insane. So I've got this single scalar value that I'm also controlling back in there with a float like I showed you before. And that's multiplying. So anything at 1 is going to be the texture, down to 0 is going to pretty much be off, and anything over 1 is going to overdrive this and make it brighter. Multiply these together, pipe it into the texture, and I've got this hue shift node, which is just like a hue and saturation slider inside of Photoshop or After Effects. You can just scroll it between 0 and 1 to change the color. And that's what this value is doing. And this whole feed goes into B. So anything that is being shown in the white is going to be on this chain, and anything that's in black is, and A is off. I did the exact same thing. I copy and pasted this whole thing down to here. The only difference is I put this 1 minus X, which is an invert. So what's white, or basically what's black into here is off. This is going to flip it. So now this black area is going to be white in the active mask. So I've got the yellow parts going through this, the blue parts going through this upper section, and then we add them together and bring these right back into the emissive. So that's how I set up this material. And when we get back into this, let's go back into material controls. You can see that the material properties that I created and plugged into here, emissive tubes multiplier and the hue shift tubes, I chained them together. You could add another thing on the sequence or whatever. But I just kind of broke apart and created unique variables for each one. And that comes back into this. So now you can see I've got my tubes shift. I can make these blue or whatever color I want. And the exact same goes for the hue shift on the rear. But now I have independent control on these, so it's all one texture set. You're not stuck, you can get around it. And I turned these off for the animations that I did, but I kept these tube light colors on because that's what I had preferred. And that's it in a nutshell. Thanks for watching, hope you found all this helpful. If you did, like, subscribe, follow, comment, especially. Just let us know what you think of it and what else you'd like to see.